you, Honourable Member. Before you speak, I want to serve notice that in 15 minutes' time we shall suspend for 25 minutes and then return. Honourable Member for Laventille East, Morvant.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'm delighted to join this debate on the supplementation of the appropriation for fiscal 2013. Mr. Speaker, but before I move on, the Member of Parliament for Morvant North. I think that the Member of Parliament, before she started, she really should have said once upon a time. Mr. Speaker, that is all I will say pertaining to what was said today. Mr. Speaker, this measure seeks to provide for the supplementary funding amounted to $2,898,091,400. Put differently, Mr. Speaker, the government of Trinidad and Tobago is seeking to augment its expenditure by a further $2.9 billion. And why, Mr. Speaker? According to the documentation provided, it says that this money is required to fund urgent and critical recurrent and capital expenditure to September 30th, 2013 in areas where insufficient or no allocation was provided. So, Mr. Speaker, if ever there was an admission of incompetence by a government, this is it. You see, Mr. Speaker, just a few months ago, we had in this Honourable House the presentation by the Minister of Finance, a national budget. You will no doubt recall, Mr. Speaker, that throughout his presentation he used terms like, I quote, "It will be taken in consultation with the affected stakeholders," end of quote. I quote again, "After consultation with relevant and affected stakeholders, I intend to obtain additional financing," end of quote. So the common theme throughout his presentation was consultation with relevant stakeholders. So today, Mr. Speaker, the Minister comes to the House and it is abundantly clear that proper consultation did not take place. How then can one explain that the mid-year review of the public sector investment program, which was conducted by the Ministry of Finance and the Economy in collaboration with other ministries and departments, was in fact the catalyst which forced the Minister to come to Parliament to authorize this increase in spending? So, Mr. Speaker, let us put this matter before us today in some perspective. I wish to refer to my contribution to the budget debate. I recall telling the Minister of Finance, and I was not alone on this side of the House, that this government in 3 years would have spent what PNM took 6 years to spend, and that in its 4th year they would have spent what the PNM took 8 years to spend. Mr. Speaker, I may have to revise my forecast and reduce the time frame to 3.5 years. You see, Mr. Speaker, this is the 3rd time in less than a year that this minister has come to this Parliament seeking to increase his expenses. Mr. Speaker, not too long ago, in the month of January 2010, there was the Finance Supplementation and Variation of Appropriation Financial Year 2012, which provided for an increase in totaling $3.4 billion, although this was partially offset by some reductions of $1.8 billion. Mr. Speaker, bearing in mind that the 2012-2013 budget, which had totaled a whopping $61.4 billion, the largest expenditure budget in the history of Trinidad and Tobago, and there were fears about the absorptive capacity of this country to accommodate expenditure of this order of magnitude. Any move to encourage or impose greater levels of expenditure on the population of this country can only mean that we have recklessly begun our trip on that slippery slope. Mr. Speaker, when one examines the breakdown of the increases being sought, I am convinced, and I understand that my colleague from La Brea spoke about the money allocated to the Ministry of Local Government. And I am convinced that the timing of this proposal is driven by a strong political undercurrent. I would like to see a breakdown of the intended expenditure for the Ministry of Local Government, which received $257 million, representing almost 10% of the overall allocation. How come? Is it because we are on the eve of local government elections? Mr. Speaker, no matter how they dice it or how they disguise it, that political objective is vividly exposed for all to see. Mr. Speaker, this UNC-led coalition government campaigned and made many promises to the people of Trinidad and Tobago. As we can now see, there is a deafening silence concerning their implementation of most of their promises. They promised to solve crime. Crime was supposed to be a thing of the past. What is the situation now? Crime continues to escalate, and the murder toll for the year is now 168. 2 weeks ago, there were 7 murders in 4 days. Last week, there were 4 murders. And this government continues to tell the citizenry of Trinidad and Tobago that crime is on the decline. All of a sudden, since they came into office, they are categorizing crime. Mr. Speaker, the number of homicides in a country is what people look at when they judge the increase or decrease in criminal activities in a country. People are being murdered on a daily basis. There are many other criminal acts which are not reported in the media, yet the Prime Minister recently stated that serious crime is down by 36%, and we would like to get the proof of that. Mr. Speaker, statistics are subjected to manipulation, and the government must see how they arrived at a 36% reduction in crime, in serious crime. A reduction in serious crimes always occurs in tandem with reduction in homicides. And Mr. Speaker, they must face the fact that they have failed to arrest the crime situation in Trinidad and Tobago. I will move to some statistics. Mr. Speaker, from January the 1st to May the 12th, 2013, the crime statistics are as follows. Murders was 138. Note, 2 months later, the murder toll is 168. At May the 12th, the murder toll was 138. We are in July the 12th. It is now 168. June the 12th. It's now 168. It's 1 month. Yeah. Yes, 1 month from May to June. Woundings and shootings was 165. Rape, incest, and other sexual offenses 162. Burglaries and break-ins 957. So do these statistics sound like something to boast about? Mr. Speaker, because for the period January to April 2013, the murder rate was 119 for the same period last year, and this year it was 124. So there was just a difference of 5 murders. The Commissioner of Police recently stated that the country is facing a massive crime challenge. On the other hand, the Deputy Commissioner of Police is saying that Trinidad and Tobago does not have a massive crime problem. The government, along with the police, is saying that there is a 36% reduction in serious crime. So, Mr. Speaker, could someone tell me what is the real story here? And if crime is on the decrease, as they say, then why is there a need for 2,500 SRPs and 317 new vehicles, which I see is in the allocation? The sanctioned strength of the police service is 7,715, and I'd like to know where these officers are. Imagine a small country like Trinidad and Tobago has 188 hotspots. And what is the government doing about this, except to make soldier police to arrest the crime situation in hotspot areas? Mr. Speaker, the government has failed in the area of national security, and the detection rate of the police service is less than 10%. And this has been going downwards instead of upwards. This low detection rate suggests that many criminals are escaping justice, and the government must take full responsibility for this. Mr. Speaker, the higher the detection rate in a country, the lower the crime. And this is one area the government should be placing emphasis on, instead of jumping on the bandwagon to boast that there is a reduction in crime with no empirical evidence to show. And I must talk about the dismantling of SORT and the grounding of the blimp and the cancellation of the OPVs, Mr. Speaker, which of course would have assisted in our crime situation. With a crime detection rate below 10%, of course the confidence of the population is at an all-time low, and it is of course low, and there's no confidence in this UNC-led coalition government with regards to their handling of the crime situation. Mr. Speaker, they continue to make up as they go along with regards to crime. Every day they come up with a new crime fighting strategy. I see an allocation for new vehicles in the police service since there is supposed to be a shortage. And I would just like to refer to this allocation, to this area of this allocation. Mr. Speaker, I just would like to ask a few questions. Does the government understand that the police service cannot continue to purchase vehicles meant for civilian use and use them as police vehicles? Does the government intend to use the established approach of the joint VEMCOT Ministry of Works and Transport and the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service to directly procure vehicles at a greatly reduced price? Mr. Speaker, as the road carnage continues to increase, can the government tell the country what has happened to the 50 purpose-built vehicles that were to be used by the traffic branch? Can the government verify through its acting commissioner of police if some of the vehicles which were meant to be patrolling the nation's highways are in fact being used to deliver mail? You see, because, Mr. Speaker, police service vehicles must be specifically designed and built for police operations. They have more robust suspensions, stronger front ends, more powerful engines, and sturdier materials used. Mr. Speaker, civilian vehicles are not designed for the rigors, and they don't hold up as purpose-built vehicles, and this is what should be done. And I'm not seeing where this is happening. I mean, you just can't just go by Neil and Massey or go and just buy a fleet of vehicles. You're actually supposed to buy purpose-built vehicles for the police service. And I have another suggestion, Mr. Speaker. In the meantime, as there's a shortage of vehicles, I would like to suggest that the Honorable Prime Minister release all the government vehicles, which her ministers have at their disposal for them and their families to ride and drive up and down Trinidad and Tobago. You see, because these vehicles were bought for the summit and were to be released to the protective services. Actually, some were released to the protective services and ministries, but not to be used by ministry officials. To be used by ministry officials and public servants, not government ministers, who are in receipt of tax-free loans and traveling allowances, and should therefore be using their personal vehicles. Mr. Speaker, these vehicles are being used, of course, maintenance and fuel-free by governmental ministers, and taxpayers now have to fork out $77,500,000 for the purchase of vehicles and equipment for the police service. And as I speak about equipment, I would like the Minister of Finance to tell us under this allocation what equipment. We just have equipment. I would like to know what equipment is to be bought for the police service.
At this time, I'd like to suspend, and we shall resume at 12:40. a.m. Okay.
12 what?
12:40. 20 minutes to 1.
Okay.